Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first AI webinar series at CTM. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Center of Transformative Media at Northeastern in the College of Art, Design, and Media. CTM is an interdisciplinary research hub dedicated to exploring how emerging media technologies can be used creatively and equitably to improve lives and shape futures. From investigating creative use of mobile technologies in everyday life to critically examining artificial intelligence as a cultural force, CTM has been bridging the innovation with social impact. Through its projects, events, and initiatives, CTM advances a vision of media not merely as a tool, but also as a platform for creativity, justice, and positive social change. Uh, Today's webinar series examines artificial intelligence as a cultural medium rather than technical tool, exploring how AI shapes communication, creativity, governance, and everyday life across diverse contexts. Through monthly conversations, we have a series of webinar that is coming up as well. Through monthly conversations between scholars, artists, and designers from CAMD and also excellent speakers from beyond, the series addresses critical themes, which includes AI and media, power, democracy. Sometimes it will include creative labor, authorship, generative systems. Sometimes it includes ethics, gaming, and interactive design, and also AI influencers, identity, digital labor. Each session combines short expert presentations with open conversations and audience dialogues. This session particularly will be moderated by Professor Adriana De Souza. She is the director of the Center for Transformative Media, chair of ICA Mobile Communication Divisions, and our AI faculty fellow at Northeastern. Professor Adriana's research on mobile media, hybrid space, and communication has been foundational in shaping how we understand technology as embedded in everyday life. She is uniquely positioned to drive this conversation and connect AI to a broader question of culture, power, and lived experiences. With that, I'm delighted to hand it over to Professor Adriana to introduce our excellent speakers for today and begin the discussion. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Sutanuka. So as Sutanuka said, I'm Adriana de Souza Silva. I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Media, and I would like to welcome our speakers for our inaugural AI webinar, AI as Media. Today, we're going to be talking with Drs. Gerard Goggin, Laura Forlano, and Vance. The way this is going to work, and I'm going to introduce each of them, and they're going to do a brief introduction. I was talking about a provocative idea on the topic of AI as media, about 5 to 7 minutes. And then we're going to have some time for the speakers to talk to each other, maybe ask questions, and then we're going to have some time at the end for Q&A from the public. If you want to ask a question to any of the participants, please put that on the chat directly to me so I can kind of moderate the conversation. And for the speakers, when your time is going to be up, I will raise my virtual hand to keep track of time. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Gerard Goggin. Gerard is an internationally renowned scholar in communication, cultural, and media studies whose pioneering research on the cultural and social dynamics of digital technology has been widely influential. He has held appointments at the University of Sydney, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, University of NSW, and the University of Queensland. Goggin has made benchmark contributions to understanding of mobile media and communication and national and international internets and their histories. So welcome, Gerard. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you so much, Sutanuka and colleagues for organizing this. It's wonderful to join this first kickoff session of the CTM series and to join wonderful colleagues Laura and Vance as well. And I know there's audience members from Northeastern as well as more broadly. So I'm really interested in the mobile aspects of AI, the kind of mobile communications aspects. a lot of my work has been about mobile cultures, mobiles and digital cultures. And so I've been really interested in the cultural dimensions. So I just think fantastic idea to have that front and center. So if you think about AI, I think one of the ways in which it's diffusing and being taken up and that we're using it in everyday lives involves mobile technologies. So particularly what is still the mobile phone, smartphones, other kinds of phones, other kinds of devices as well. So you see AI being embedded in different kinds of mobile technologies, and Prof. Adriana has been influential in bringing this to visibility in the last few months. And you can see, for instance, the mobile phone companies in the last year and a half. You see Apple, you see Samsung. In different Asian contexts, you see the Chinese handset vendors promoting and spruiking their AI kind of offerings. Some of those haven't been too exciting. They've been pretty dull, not worked very well. But there's a real sense in which they're working on this. You've seen a range of other vendors coming up with particular dedicated AI devices with the idea that we may not have our smartphones forever. Hard to believe, perhaps. But you might have what actually are called the things that have been called wearables, small devices that you might wear as part of fashion, or you could wear them as a brooch or a badge or something, would become your AI device. So there are a number of those that have been put out there. Humane did an AI pin. It's another organization called Rabbit has done a small square box that's AI optimized as well. So there's a lot of kind of action going on here. One of the sort of vaporware, as the old phrase goes, or the kind of rumor and myth, but it is actually reality, is the idea that the designer Jony Ive, who did Apple, is joining forces to come up with Sam Altman to come up with a major kind of the iPhone of AI. There's a lot of kind of hype about this. But I think it's actually quite instructive, and there's a lot of things going on that are just pretty ordinary, mundane, perhaps more in the infrastructure, in the so-called back end, or optimizing the way we use mobile media, whether that's conserving batteries, whether that's giving more kind of functionality, as well as the kind of AI tools of the Chat GPT variety, or Claude, or others being used as well. And so I think it's really interesting when we think about AI, or I find it so, to think about the mobile technology dimension and this mobility dimension. Actually, if you have a broader idea of mobile media beyond the phone, and you think about things like what they call micro-mobility, so e-scooters, autonomous vehicles, colleagues here have worked on a range of other ideas, drones, and we see them in military context, in war context at the moment in terrible ways. You actually have AI being used for quite some time in contexts of mobility. So I think when we take this kind of lens to AI, we're thinking about the mobility, and I think increasingly we're also locating that. And I think one of the big issues about the AI, generative AI moment of the last 2 years particularly has been, what are these locations of AI? And I think one of them is in the mobile technology that many of the world's population are using in different ways, depending on the circumstances in which they can afford to use it, the circumstances in which they've got the support, the expertise, the literacies and so on to use it. And a lot of those everyday uses, as is often the case with technology, are not well understood. They're still happening. We know across many groups, people are experimenting with this. And I think this is a sense in which we can just dive in straight away and see AI in a different way, in these more mundane, everyday kind of ways. And to then ask some questions, important questions about how is it diffusing, being shaped around this kind of areas, and particularly across what we might call the majority world, or the whole kind of range of international contexts, particularly contexts where we've seen, and it's been one of the features I think of mobile phone take up in the last 2 or 3 decades, people in contexts of poverty and resource constraint people from a whole range of different demographics have been using mobile phones. And that's one of the ways in which they've got access to the internet, they've got access to a range of emerging technologies. So I think some of the questions that the concerns at the moment are actually old questions about what we might call digital inclusion and inequalities, but new questions as well about how that plays out. And we see colleagues doing really important work about this. And it gives us a different perspective on different parts of this rollout. We're doing work on Southeast Asia, a range of countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, to look at how this is playing out and how people in the perhaps the populous, what you might call the populous edges of digital networks, are gaining access to this. How are they taking up AI and so on? So I'm out of time, so I'm going to wind up now, and really intrigued to hear what my co-panelists have to say and to hear from as many people on the call as we can. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gerard. So now I wanted to welcome Professor Laura Forlano. Laura is a Fulbright award-winning and National Science Foundation funded scholar, is a disabled writer, social scientist, and design researcher. She's professor in the Department of Art and Design and Communication Studies in the College of Arts, Media, and Design at Northeastern University, and Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change. Forlano is also an affiliated faculty at the Information Society Project at Yale Law School. She received her PhD in communication from Columbia University.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Hopefully my slides are visible. And thank you all to the Center for Transformative Media. Great to be affiliated with the center, but also to be here for this very first event. So as you heard, my name is Laura Forlano. I'm a disabled social scientist and design researcher, and I've been studying the social implications of emerging technologies such as AI for about 20 years now. Here's my wonderful research group. I won't go over everyone's profile, but I'm delighted to work with a really great team of postdocs and PhD students here at the College of Arts, Media, and Design at Northeastern. And the original research question got me started towards this type of work was really thinking about how do you study people, things, and societies that don't exist yet? And specifically, this terminology around what the future is, it came up in a lot of my research sites. And so our lab really focuses on thinking about this concept of critical futures, really employing social science research from science and technology studies, feminist technoscience, cryptechnoscience, together with generative design practice and creative methods. So here's an image from a recent talk that I gave, which was the very first time I gave what I call data performance. And this is something I've been working on really for the last 2 years or so, but have finally started working with a theater coach and recently gave a full-length data performance at a conference in Taiwan in December. And in this performance, I take data from my insulin pump and sensor system and read it aloud, with certain kinds of valences. And so I've been writing about and making with my own experiences, living intimately with machines, this insulin pump and sensor system that I mentioned, which I use to manage type 1 diabetes. And I've experienced a number of what I consider to be AI harms. And at the same time, I'm alive to share this creative work with you today. So moving on from the data performance, here's an image of the types of alerts and alarms that I receive from the device. And you can kind of see the power asymmetries here between alerts that are clearly about the machine taking care of the human, such as you have low blood sugar, versus alerts where the human is performing labor for the machine. So I think of myself as a disabled cyborg. That's the way I choose to kind of identify. And the devices, of course, are inseparable from my body, my subjectivity, my politics. And I use this term as a constant reminder that it's not only myself, but also my machines that are disabled, full of flaws and failures, gaps and glitches, seams and symptoms, errors and omissions, bugs and biases. So the second creative project I'm going to talk about is one called the Alert Blanket. And this is a project that I worked on with my postdoc, Sasha de Koning, who's a textile artist. And we spent about a year conceptualizing, developing, and prototyping this piece. But this blanket is a digitally knit data physicalization that takes the same data set, which is a 1 month of alert and alarm data from the device, which I took from July 2019. And it tries to tell a story about the accumulation of these alerts or errors. And actually on the left side of the blanket, you can see that that is the side which is more about the human taking care of the machine, so those orange patches. And then the middle is kind of where the two data sets come together. And then the right side is, you can see, less frequent alerts, which are specifically about the machine kind of taking care of the human. Now, of course, the human and the machine in this context, because I need it to stay alive, they're deeply entangled and interdependent. But this kind of creative project, which is not a data visualization, so it's not meant to be legible in the way that a graph or a chart would be. It's more of a data collage that still tells the story, but in a more abstract way. And this is just showing it at a hotel room. It's going to eventually be a full-size blanket in an installation piece. So that's the second piece. The third piece is a set of robotic sculptures that I worked on with the artist Itziar Barrio. Here is one of those sculptures. Again, the same data set, and this project was done a couple of years ago. So the first exhibition was in March 2023. And these are robotic sculptures that use cement, as you can see, and spandex actually from Itziar's own, closet. And my data is printed on some of the circuit boards, and the movements of this particular piece, are sort of related to that data set. So this is an article that we wrote about that project. I'm really thinking about moving away from perhaps the tech industry or consulting industry understanding of data doubles, which are these kind of models that are used to make decisions as proxies for lived experience, and towards thinking about the sculptures, the role of art, and what we might call data demons. So they're not meant to be legible in that way. So they're sort of working in these other ways but still engaging with machine learning, computation, and we could say have a commentary about AI today. The fourth project is actually a zine, and I'm going to be wrapping up in a minute. Eric Salvaggio and Caroline Cinders, among others. And this is a research group that I joined called the Algorithmic Resistance Research Group, so the ARG zine. And this contains a number of pieces in the zine which are commentaries on AI. So, in these various ways, I'm just going to very quickly show the theory, but, theory from communications, such as James Carey's ritual view of communications, Nick Seaver's work on algorithms as culture, Susan Lee Starr's work on the ethnography of infrastructure, sort of these mainstream, as you can see, like what's more cultural than Barbie, this commentary on sensor error, and Mike Annity's work on seeing like an algorithmic error. These types of ideas are what drives me to think about some of these questions, which Danya Glabau, my co-author, and I did in the recent Cyborg book, which we have a whole chapter on art and design examples there. And sort of just to wrap up, it's like these arts and design projects are really important because they're about experimenting with new technology. We are able to exploit these topics around error and failure as a site of intervention, and that these interventions, are political, no matter the politics, of course, but that some projects are deliberate critiques of the objective and scientific framing of AI. And just, for me, it was really about finding more performative, visceral, and effective ways to engage people in these critiques of AI harm, specifically that, the body is not a computer. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Laura. That was great. So now, last but not least, we're gonna welcome Vance Ricks. Vance is a teaching professor holding a joint appointment in the College of Social Science and Humanities and the Curie College of Computer Science at Northeastern University. Ricks earned his doctorate on philosophy from Stanford University, and before joining Northeastern, he was an associate professor of philosophy at Guilford College. He has published on parasociality and on the implications of social networks for friendship and for gossip. He has co-authored publications on autonomous vehicles and on faculty policies regarding the use of generative AI systems. His teaching and research focus on technology and moral philosophy, broadly speaking. Current research projects are on computer ethics pedagogy and separately on parasociality and social robots. Vance has helped redesign several courses in Northeastern introductory and intermediate level computer science curriculum to embed the teaching of moral reasoning and ethical issue spotting in those courses. So, Vance.
Thanks, everyone. Buy Laura's book. It's great. The cyborg book is great. So I don't have slides. I will just talk briefly about one of the kind of ongoing research questions and projects that I'm involved with. The philosophy department at Northeastern does not have a graduate program, so it's only an undergraduate major. So what that means is faculty who want to do research with students in that department will need to do that with undergraduate students. And I'm happy to say that we have a just stellar group of undergraduate students every year that we can work with. The particular group that I work with is called AID, which is short for AI and Data Ethics. Every semester, the group of students comes together and picks some project related to one or both of those topics. We try to restrict or at least encourage the membership of the group to be students who have already had at least one prior course on the philosophy of technology or some related topic or field. And so those students collectively, with some guidance from the faculty member, decide what they're going to work on as that semester's project. 2.5 years ago, for example, the group decided shortly after the kind of release of ChatGPT on the world that they wanted to find out what faculty attitudes were about students' uses of generative AI. They also wanted to know how far the faculty perceptions of students' uses were from what's actually going on. A year ago, the project that the group worked on was to provide feedback on a draft AI legislation that the State Attorney General of Colorado wanted our consultation on, an AI bill for the state of Colorado. And so we spent the semester researching some of the things going on with that bill, some of the particular areas that it was focused on, such as algorithmic discrimination, and then providing our feedback. This past semester, the students really were interested in the idea of AI literacy because they keep being told that they need to be AI literate, they need to learn AI literacy, it needs to be something that they cultivate, otherwise they will be out on the street, and that might happen in any case. But they were very curious about what actually AI literacy amounts to. So we spent the semester canvassing a variety of mostly US universities and some larger colleges that have said anything about AI literacy to see what common themes and threads we found, whether there be any, and also what sorts of gaps they thought were important that should be filled in some way. So what the finding of this group was, so we looked at maybe 20 different universities, including Northeastern, just looking at their websites and maybe if we knew people at those institutions, asking them, do you have some pointers to anything that leadership at your university is saying about AI literacy and what that amounts to? And we did find a variety of definitions and different characterizations of it. Most of the definitions, however, including those at Northeastern, focus on technical proficiency. So that means basically knowing how AI systems work, whether we're talking about generative ones or other kinds. And the sort of focus on ethical awareness or the ethical dimensions of AI systems in context of literacy was mostly framed in terms of concepts like fairness, transparency, accountability, privacy, and security. The students in the group thought there were at least two additional dimensions that needed to be highlighted. One had to do with metacognition, the ability to reflect on one's own thinking, how do discussions of AI literacy omit or include that dimension? The question, in other words, not just what can this tool do, but how can this tool shape the way that I think, or how is it shaping the way that I think? A second important missing dimension that they identified from most of the characterizations of AI literacy had to do with looking at a deeper understanding of the socio-political, the geopolitical, the labor, and the environmental mechanisms that make AI systems possible. So, in the same ways that we have belatedly done with other forms of mediating technologies like radio, television, and social media sites and spaces, what the students were saying is that we need to enlarge the way that we're thinking about what it means to be an AI literate person to understand we're often talking about the tip of the iceberg when we're focusing just on does a student or does someone know how to write prompts in a good way, or does someone know that they should look for six fingers in an image to understand that it's AI generated, but rather also to be able to ask who is creating these systems, how are they reshaping power relations, how is my use of these systems implicating me in that or not implicating me in that. I will stop there and see the rest of my time or whatever. I'm
All
looking
right.
forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Vance. Yeah, I didn't need to raise my hand for you. So now we actually get to the part of the webinar in which we can start the discussion. So I would first of all tell the audience, if you want to, feel free to start sending me questions directly so I can ask the speakers. But I wanted to give the opportunity for the speakers before to kind of have a conversation with each other. So in the next 15 minutes or so. So I wanted to open the floor for either Gerard, Laura, and Vance, and ask you if you have any questions for each other.
I'm happy to kick off if that's okay, but I just really, really enjoyed and appreciated, Vance and Laura, what you had to say. And I wanted to pick up the many things I'd want to have a conversation here more about, Vance, and your work, but because also I have strong interest in disability and technology, I just wanted to pick up your presentation, Laura, and say I just found it such a breath of fresh air in all sorts of ways, and that I'm part of different groups of people who are working around disability and emerging AI, including Meryl Alper at Northeastern, is part of a broader project we have in Australia on disability and digital citizenship. And getting some headway on this topic is really tricky, right? One of the use cases in mobile AI has to do with, in some ways, long-standing dominant way to see disability and technology around assistive technology in a narrow kind of way. And there's really interesting aspects in which, AI, mobile AI is meshing in with extending the capabilities of technology, but then getting headway against the stereotypes, the sort of techno-salvationism, the disabling nature of it, I thought was really interesting. And I very much agree with what you were saying about the creation of new forms of disability through technology. That is idea that can be tricky to understand, to explain to people, but really great. But I love the you've highlighting the work of art and its potential to reshape it. And I think maybe this does key into literacies, to Vance, what you're talking about, this idea that the metacognition, the dimensions of people being able to have some agency around the technologies and explore other aspects than just, yeah, as you say, prompt engineering and things like that. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerard. That was great to hear how you were able to stitch those two together as well. Yeah, I think one of the questions that I had was about thinking about the new sites, because about 10 years ago, when people were discussing AI, I remember this conversation around, well, we can't really study it. This was in the social science field, and science and technology studies in particular, was we can't really study it because everything is proprietary and it's mostly being developed in corporate contexts, and thus we social scientists can't really get access to them. And so thus it's a black box, but what can we study? Whereas at this moment, 10 years later, there are, very clear, there's widespread adoption and use of some of the things, sometimes willingly and sometimes obviously forced into platforms and onto devices in ways that are not necessarily desirable, like when certain tools pop up when you're using certain applications, right? So yeah, I think it has changed quite a lot. And I just wondered, where I think you both talked about different sites where you've studied these technologies, but thinking about for an everyday user, let's say, or everyday critical, AI literacy to emerge, like what should people be looking at in everyday life? Where should they be looking to kind of learn those things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's another opportunity for researchers, scholars, academics to connect to public audiences. There's a local organization here in Boston called Joint Family, which holds a series of workshops actually that's intended as intergenerational. Hey, you've heard a lot about AI. What is that? Come, bring your grandparents or bring your grandchildren, and we have people, some of them academics, some of them people working in industry, who can come and give basics in ways that are very beginner friendly, but that also lead people to think more broadly about, let's pull the camera back and look at some of the larger implications. So I think some of it just has to do with those of us who have, or at least claim to have, certain kinds of knowledge, just doing more work to make sure that we're publicly distributing and disseminating that knowledge, and let's even not call it knowledge, but just the kinds of questions that we're raising. I think even being able to say to people, yes, it's important to have these questions right now. It doesn't mean we know how to answer them, but just reminding people that it's okay to ask those questions and not to be sure, because I think every day there are conflicting messages about the future of humanity, and are these actual new forms of life, or is it just statistical extrusion, or what's going on? So it does make sense to me that people wouldn't know where to listen or whom to listen to.
I might just dive in or kind of loop in as well with a perspective, Laura, building on what you say, Vance. In the Disability and Digital Citizenship project that we've got, it's quite a kind of a big project with a lot of researchers, but we're also engaging with a lot of disability, deaf and other organisations. And in some ways that's a traditional strategy, but I'm reminded of by what you're saying, Vance, that you've got organisations that are often led by people with disabilities increasingly now, but a range of other stakeholders as well. They might have scientists. There might be a group working, a brain injury lobby group that's working a lot with, say, different kinds of science and engineering folk. So they've got a lot of knowledge of different sorts, but they've got a lot of members and perspectives on how things work. So one of our sort of tactics, I suppose, is working with them in different sites to understand how they see, what's the sense, what they say, follow the actors, right? Understand where people are at in their lives with this and how it's cropping up. And I think one of the ways things crop up is because we're living in these kind of digital societies, very uneven. And it's moved on, as you say, Laura, from where you talk about 10, 20 years ago. And there are a range of points of where things are coming up, including AI, but also mandated, right? Where people have to engage in different ways. So I think one of our tactics is to work with organisations that already have some capabilities, typically underfunded or being defunded, but where there's some real gains to be had on both sides because there's different reciprocities and interdependences between the researchers and different organisations in those civic, we might call them civic media rights centres, or non-government organisations and civil society, essentially.
I think also, so I don't know which Russian revolutionary said it. Maybe it was Lenin, but the statement that you might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And so I think that that's also true when it comes to AI systems, that they are being used on you right now. Whether you have resolved never to use a computer in your life, it to some extent doesn't matter, right? That you are still a data subject in all kinds of ways. And so at the very least, it behooves you to understand that. And just to know what that means and what sorts of possibilities for agency that may leave you. And so actually, so Laura, as somebody working at the Burns Center, right, this is, I think, part of what you all do there that's so great, that the kind of work the students are doing really is, I think, meant to demystify a lot of systems and the working of systems in people's lives, whether it's in terms of their eligibility for benefits or even their ability just to understand the often complex instructions for how to comply with some city regulation.
Yeah, those are all great points and great suggestions. I would also add that perhaps just in, I think Gerard, at the beginning, you used the word mundane in your lead in, and I think that people are quite sophisticated about the ways in which like many platforms are getting flooded right now with AI slop. And how people are sort of differentiating with between what's a more authentic piece of media that they might want to engage with, or some, haven't done a study on that, so I don't really know what are the new ways of deciphering these things. But I think people do develop a fairly quick, a very sophisticated understanding of being shaped by AI continually. It doesn't matter if you are an AI refuser, you're still participating in a society that where AI is shaping culture. So that was kind of my thought there.
Well, can I ask you both a question on that, picking up from that comment? One thing that the students in the aid group and I, one of our liveliest conversations last semester had to do with what the connection is between literacy and use. So they said, for example, the origin of the idea of literacy is connected to the ancient technology of books. And it would be very weird to describe oneself as highly literate but also someone who just doesn't read on principle, right? I don't use that technology. And yet some of the students did feel that you could be highly AI literate in the sense of being deeply aware of the kinds of extractive practices that make AI systems possible, or just knowing what a generative model is, or being able to distinguish that from other kinds of AI system. And yet at the same time, as you put it just now, be a refuser. And other students thought, no, literacy implies use. And so there was that sort of, I was meant to be the tiebreaker and I just failed utterly at that. I think I do lean towards the idea that one could be literate and a non-user, but then I don't think that about books. So what would you two say about what you see as the implications of AI literacy for whether and how one might choose to limit uses of AI technology in one's life, to the extent that that's even a choice?
I mean, I think one of the points that we make in the zine that I showed is that, one needs to engage in order to be critical. So thus that would sort of be on the side of like engagement equals literacy in that sense. Um, But I think that also one might say that they might use it in certain ways and not in others. So having a very informed way of using and sort of deliberately not using certain aspects of it, or certain platforms owned by certain entities, so being very cautious and deliberate, just like in the ways that we might choose a messaging app like Signal instead of, another, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Vance. And yeah, to build on that as well. Like, so I'm coming from the land of the social media ban. Australia's, announced a social media ban over a year ago, and it's now in place and data's coming through. So I think, I mean, maybe there's like there's a spectrum of uses, right? Famously in like discussions of use, like non-use, they're not just a spectrum, but there's different kinds of uses. And maybe there's the spectrum of literacies, right? Because I do think that, going back to the Industrial Revolution and the frame breakers and people resisting machines, that maybe the kind of engagement and the qualities of engagement, and also the social relations of that, is important as well. In the Disability Digital Citizenship Project, we're in, the dialogues we're having, particularly around a range of folk in the disability movement, are really interesting. There's some people deeply engaged in AI, for, you know, on a range of different fronts, and others being really quite critical, and then as a range of their membership being fearful about it. But it's coming also on the back of like the waves of digitization and the use of it in, say, an Australian context. There is actually a popular awareness of what you were saying before, the systems being used on people, because they were used in a kind of, you know, profiling and discrimination kind of exercise by the government with really terrible consequences for people, welfare payments. So I think, I mean, I'm really sympathetic to the idea that, yeah, you need to know, you need to have or foreground or understand, think about your knowledge and engaging with the technology, right? But do we like earlier phases of game studies where game scholars really go, well, you know, I've got to spend the whole week playing this new game, or I can't really talk about games. Well, clearly you do need some knowledge in teaching games courses and you're teaching VR. You do need to introduce, let's say, students to VR. But I think there's also a sense in which if part of what we're thinking about is the metacognition, the critical aspects, the fuller ways, to just be able to step back and say, is that really so? Like, and it goes to the wonderful futures work you do, Laura. You know, how do we open up and say, and I think that's a big problem, isn't it? The kind of democratic deficit, the sense in which people have reacted against so-called big tech, right? To say, we don't, you know, does it have to be like this? We now have a very highly commercialized, commodified digital economy, and we have digital platforms and super apps. And is AI just going to entrench that? Or can we come up with these other, you know, potentially wonderful ways that the technology might interact with our bodies and with our communities and our different identities?
Yeah, I actually, since we are in the topic of AI literacy, I do have questions coming up from the audience. So one question, and folks, feel free to send me more questions. We have about 15 minutes left. From Cynthia Feeney. Is building AI literacy for the public worthwhile when the tech discourse may move on, as it did with blockchain in the past few years?
That's a great question. And I actually wanted to point towards maybe the absences of what do we ignore or miss when we are constantly chasing these shiny objects. And you know, one of my doctoral students, Lee Kravchenko, is doing very interesting work interviewing UX designers. And I've also recently been in conversation with some hiring managers at tech companies who say that right now, soft skills, communication skills, and collaboration skills are considered to be highly valuable and require cultivating. And these might be the exact skills that, you know, due to several years of COVID and much more Zoom and remote work in our life, that we're actually sort of atrophying at. So thus, instead of, you know, following the ball of AI literacy, maybe we should be instead, you know, changing what's happening in the classroom towards, you know, being here together in this room matters, and we need to learn to talk together. And, you know, that's one of the approaches that I've taken. And in my Designing Futures class, students are required to kind of perform their future scenarios. So it's not really something that can be done. It's not a test. It's not something that you can just prompt your way through. You actually have to get there and do like a theatrical version of that dystopian or utopian or somewhere in between future.
So I guess I would quickly answer, if I can be quick about this. If we're focusing on AI as meaning generative models, then okay, that might have a good parallel to the new shiny object. But AI as a set of technologies is more than a half century old at this point, and so I don't see, in broad terms, I don't see it as a shiny new thing. And so I do think it is important still to learn. Yes, generative AI may be a somewhat more recent paradigm in some ways and not so much in others. Don't hang your hat on that unique hook, but still maybe learn how to put it into context of other forms of AI system and the broader history of AI systems and of computation more generally and of media more generally. That I think is still an important set of knowledge and discernment for people to develop. In addition to the things that you were mentioning, Laura, I'm on a lifelong crusade for people to stop calling those soft skills, because if you look at the way the world is, apparently many people find those skills very, very hard.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I agree with your point about the historical context and just um, not, this is why I prefer terms like critical computing, like computing in general as a thing, not AI, but so many of the ways of framing what these technologies are now are often linked to AI, but I love the term, of course, socio-technical systems, and that does really highlight the social and the cultural. And it's, it captures it right there in the same phrase, even though it's not the easiest thing to get your tongue around sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I think that also relates to what Gerard was mentioning in the beginning, that in terms of mobile AI, that the AI is more than the writing prompts for, ChatGPT or Claude. It's embedded into urban city infrastructures and the mobile devices we carry. So it's going to be impacting all aspects of our lives. I do have another question here from Evelyn O'Donnell from CTM. Many people, including myself, view AI media as slop media slash content, like the recent Coca-Cola ad. Is it possible to create good or quality AI media, especially considering the negative environmental social impact?
I'm happy to say something first, though. I'm not sure I'm have like masses of expertise in this. I mean, I think we're hoping yes, right? Like, I think that's part of what the moment is about trying to understand how this comes on the back of maybe a complex set of whether it's disinformation, whether it's debates about the nature of kind of user-generated content, entertainment, where culture's going. And I think the cultural stakes are really kind of important. One of the clear problems is how the systems are developing, right? How these media forms are developing. And I suppose maybe the stakes now in synthetic media where the sheer capacity perhaps for the zone to be flooded with this sort of content, and how do people how do audiences form around that, disidentify around that. And that is it is a huge project. And one of the problems is that maybe at the moment some tools are not really great for it. Governance and regulation is really struggling, right? In different contexts, governments have been trying to regulate parts of this with GROK more recently, right, in coming days. The e-safety commissioner in Australia last year has banned the Notify apps, but then X has taken the regulator to court around moderation. But there's a broad range of things that that's a slow moving entity, the regulation and governance piece, and I think other aspects of how do you build a kind of vibrant, diverse kind of set of media industries now, when the business models have changed and creativity has changed, is a problem. But there's also lots of potential, I think, and resources.
Anyone else would like to jump in on that? Or otherwise, I have another question from Evelyn
I
as
think
well. Go
I
ahead,
think
Laura.
one difficulty around regulation is that, this sort of socio-technical or socio-technical view is not the one that is, being used in those regulatory contexts, right? So I've been in some government webinars a couple of years ago now that were talking about AI in the healthcare space, and sort of companies, of course, are wanting less of a regulatory burden. On the other hand, saying sort of, well, what do you intend for this AI tool to do? And then thus, if the tool matches your intention, you may not need to go through multiple rounds of constant regulation. That seems very problematic. And, I have some very specific examples of AI is that it's just a tool. And I think our whole argument in this conversation is that it's not just a tool.
Yeah, so following up with that, there's another question for you, and I think that connects a little bit with what Laura mentioned earlier, her work. Then working with AI generated content and making into tactile media like a neat blanket, are there any specific approaches that you go about interpreting or translating the data? Is it something that you list as material or co-author of the work?
Oh, that's a great question. It's something I wrote about in the article that I showed. The well, I mean, so it's interesting because curators, I think, also aren't sure quite how to think about this question. And the question is like, do you put the data set, is the data itself a material? Or since the data comes from like my device, then am I, and I'm the one who transcribed the data from the device, then am I the author of that? And does that get listed, in a museum? So I think there are lots of questions and maybe not clear norms yet about those things. And that, in that particular project, and of course, like even I've written before about, is the data or the knitting machine, like, do you call it a collaborator for the purpose of that project, or is AI a collaborator when you're making these generative AI visual images or films? And I think, I think at one point it did sound like a really attractive framing to do that. Now I'm not really so sure.
All right. We're almost at time, but I would like to give you all like an opportunity to give like some, if you have any ideas to wrap up or that to leave people, some thoughts that we should take from this conversation.
What maybe one thought is, I think, there's a lot of synergy across our perspectives, perhaps. Um, I think what might be interesting is to find out what people disagree on, like those divergent different perspectives that Vance mentioned among students I'm examining this question, because there's just so much opportunity to really think in a more like nuanced way, and that requires a lot more examples and different sites of research where we can look at this and how it plays out. Um, yeah.
I think for me, one thing that I struggle with, and one thing, particularly as an instructor, people feel a certain way about, let's say, 8 men, many of whom live in a 30 square mile radius of San Francisco and whose visions have a disproportionate effect on the lives of 8 billion people. And that makes it difficult to think clearly about the affordances of these technologies, and in particular, some of their liberatory potential or emancipatory potential or community building potential in clear ways. So again, this is a struggle, I think, for me personally, as well as for other people, is to try to step away from whatever you might think about Sam Altman or Elon Musk or Microsoft or Palantir or Baidu, for that matter, and really try to think about, in particular in the context of mobile devices and things that are smaller scale, what are some ways in which certain kinds of agency and control might be wrested away? And in particular, how might we need to focus more on those examples to change some of the narratives about inevitability or about progress?
Sounds great. I mean, I would just add, well, I've learned a great deal. I found it incredibly interesting and very convinced, I suppose, that in talking about, say, the socio-cultural perspective is really helpful. Many of us do that a lot, but how to make the headway. And I agree about, they're just expanding the different perspectives, the cases, the sites, really important. And maybe it's also that how do you get both some nuance, but maybe some kind of purchase in those discussions about how can people shape this? How is it being shaped to open up from, just maybe there's a narrowness in the perspective that you've got certain actors driving this, and the more ways that we can try and figure out how to broaden and deepen the discussion, I think the better. So many thanks.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time. And for the audience, we would love to hear your feedback. We shared in the chat earlier a link to a feedback form for this webinar. And I hope you can join us for our next webinar that's happening next month. We're going to have once a month. So just stay tuned to our newsletter and social media and the registration forms. And thank you, Gerard, Laura, and Vance for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
So much.
Be well, everyone.
Bye.